This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Well, welcome aboard, folks. Dr. Charles Parker one more time here at Core Brain Journal. And we have a very interesting tool that we're going to hear about. And we're not only going to hear about the tool, we're going to hear about the tool's inventor and how he got there and what he does with it. It's going to be very interesting. Kelly Roman, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here.
So what I'm going to do is tell folks a little bit about our sponsors, and then we'll go ahead and find out more about you in just a moment. So first of all, what we wanted to do is mention that you listeners already know how much we love the reality of data here at CBJ, Core Brain Journal. And today we welcome our clinical friend and new sponsored partner, Direct Health Access Laboratory. With over 3 million studies, they are deep leaders of experience with a big picture of measuring, for example, methylation, cryptopyrrole, and copper challenges. Hey, these things directly affect how your mind works. We see it every day. They provide global service with a molecular focus. Stay tuned. We'll talk more about them in a minute. And then our other guests and people that sponsor us, they're not guests, they have been guests. Rob McCartney, who runs James Barry Robinson, has been a guest on the Core Brain Journal. And you who have listened here already know how much we appreciate this other part, direct improvements of mind care. And what they do at Barry Robinson Center here in beautiful downtown Norfolk, they have a deep interest in fresh options to address the complexity of adolescent treatment failure nationally and internationally, built TRICARE friendly and residential care. Some kids can't make it with regular hospitalizations and myriads of different medications, and Barry Robinson really does a very good job with them. They provide a holistic environment that sets children, teens, and families on the path to real internal healing. And I can tell you right now from personal experience, I know their work with families because we've shared them over here in Norfolk, a truly different residential experience. More in a moment. So let's go talk to Kelly and talk about Kelly to start off. Let me introduce you to him. Kelly is a New York City native, co-founded Fisher Wallace Labs. Chip Fisher was a guest here on Core Brain Journal. Very interesting conversation on corebrainjournal.com/087. Great interview. And Kelly there leads product development at Fisher Wallace. He is involved with regulatory affairs, marketing, VR strategy. I know what that means. We're going to ask him to tell us what it means. And e-commerce. I mean, Kelly, with all that, you must be a lawyer.
Or I must work at a startup. One of the two, right?
Prior to Fisher Wallace, Kelly received his bachelor's degree from Harvard and served as a marketing executive for the scientific journal Nature. Very big deal. Excellent, excellent journal. And Nielsen Media and venture-backed software company. So he's been around the block. Kelly is considered a pioneer in the commercialization of non-invasive brain stimulation technology. Fasten your seatbelts, folks. This is going to be a very doggone interesting conversation. So I'm going to say one more thing about what we're doing. Kelly invented and is in the process of launching Kortex, Kortex, the first over-the-counter neurostimulation device designed to be used with VR headsets. There's that word again. So Kelly, first of all, tell us a little bit what the VR thing means, and then tell us about yourself.
Sure. Thanks again for having me. So the VR stands for virtual reality. And, you know, most people are familiar, probably have seen it on the news or on blogs. If you haven't already tried it out, is basically an immersive form of interaction with a computer-generated world that's completely immersive. And so the most popular VR device piece of hardware out there right now is the Samsung Gear VR, and basically you snap your Samsung phone into it, and into basically a big pair of goggles. You put it over your eyes, you strap it to, it has a strap that goes around your head, and that piece of hardware is able to track your head movements and also now track your hand movements. And so you can, when you turn your head, your entire visual field that's computer generated also moves with you. So it's a very convincing and immersive form of visual experience, basically, that's computer generated. There's also something called AR, which is augmented reality. And that is probably most consumed today over Instagram and Snapchat, where you can have a real photo, and then you can put some animated elements over it, whether it's a face mask or a big clown tongue, that kind of stuff. So the combination of actual reality with computer generated elements is augmented reality, but fully fully created and fully computerized reality is virtual reality. And that's where you really have the most control over what you're seeing.
So it's a virtual reality. It's a different world. You're in a completely different geography, right, a place, environment.
Yes.
You don't just go outside. You go to Germany, or you go to a place that's like maybe a place that you've never even been before, that's unreal in the sense that it isn't Earth-like. It can get, I'm imagining it can get pretty odd. Is that true?
Yeah. And I mean, I think, the gaming community, the video gaming community, has really been the major focus of this technology. And that's natural, because it's a natural extension of kind of regular video games in a way, and kind of taking it to the next level where you're fully immersed in an alien world. But there's some tremendous healthcare opportunities that have already been well researched, actually, but I think the healthcare aspects of VR is going to be the next thing that mass consumer audience is really going to hear about and learn about, and I think will engage a lot more people who get a lot more people interested in VR who aren't gamers, who aren't necessarily interested in playing a video game. And that's the audience that I'm really most interested in with Kortex, and by combining our FDA cleared technology with content that is going to really amplify the results of what we're trying to do, whether it's stress reduction, or on the medical side, treating depression, anxiety, sleep disorders. There's just a tremendous opportunity by combining neurostimulation with virtual reality.
So that's a very interesting term. You dropped it very easily and semi-quietly there. FDA cleared. Very important. So this isn't something you've just invented in New York and decided to run around with. This is something you've actually done some work with it, and you've got certain authorities who understand medical care saying this is a legitimate thing that has some measure of successes. Apparently, you've done some studies that have proven the ability that they work.
That's correct, and what I like to say is we have a number of studies that have smaller subject size but still large enough to have statistical significance, and we have studies that look at the physiological effects of our neurostimulation, meaning how they stimulate neurochemical production and do things like dampen the default mode network of the brain and lower cortisol. And we also have studies that show actual clinical significance for symptom reduction for major depressive disorder, bipolar depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and insomnia. So, there is a long history of research on alternating current neurostimulation, and but the research that's actually been done with our specific device, there's about a dozen studies, and the most recent was a pilot study on bipolar depression that we did at Mount Sinai here in New York with Dr. Igor Galenker, who's one of the nation's leading bipolar researchers. And that was a double-blind, placebo-controlled study all of the patients that got active treatment had durable and significant symptom reduction. There's no side effects. There's no causing hypomania in the patients. So
Really?
so we definitely have, not as much data as you would see for a new drug, but at the same time, because the side effect rate is so small with our technology, you don't need the same size subject studies to kind of tease out all of the side effects that could happen, say, with a drug. So we now have 25,000 patients that we've in our clinical practice, and we've had hundreds of patients that have participated in our studies.
Well, that is so interesting, because I mean, if there's anything that's controversial over in psychiatry, I mean, ADD is number one, bipolar is number two. I mean, there are other issues that are going
Very
on,
hard
but
to treat. Yeah.
And really, what both of those are is really a manifestation of what I call the fashion show, because it's so busy looking at appearances that people aren't really looking at what's going on with neurophysiology. They're not really looking at brain function. They're like, here's a person. Are they hyperactive or inattentive? And then going over on the bipolar side, I've had people come in who are 12-year-old kids in the sixth grade and say, well, my friend is bipolar. I'm like, well, how did you know that? Well, he's having mood swings all the time. I mean, if a 12-year-old kid can make a diagnosis, then
Right.
everybody by default is board certified.
Right. And I think that, it's actually quite recent, 2012, where there's the first published study in alternating current neurostimulation that showed that calming of the default mode network. And so that is now considered one of the primary mechanisms of action, and that's something that was focused on in that bipolar depression study.
Now, tell us what that word means, the default mode network. That's new to our audience.
So that my understanding of it is that that's the kind of the center brain that tends to be very active when you're anxious, when you're thinking about your problems, and tends to be calmed down when your attention is brought towards an external stimulus. So if you're looking at a dog running across a yard and you're focusing on that, your default mode network is suppressed, and so the device is actually able to do that physiologically, and we believe that that's a big part of its success in reducing these symptoms.
Well, let's take it one step further, Kel, and go a little bit more into what a person might see. Now, I'm obviously, it's probably much more comprehensive than a simple conversation, but if you could just give us a little bit of a picture. The person puts the apparatus on. Sure. Is it a headset? What actually?
Sure. So the Kortex, which is our product, is a neurostimulator that attaches to the back of a VR head strap. So there's really two pieces of hardware. You have the VR, the virtual reality goggles that have a head strap. You put those on, and then you attach our unit, Kortex, to the back of it. And there's a couple of wires and electrodes that come out of either side of that and tuck into the headband. That's the head strap for the VR goggles, in the exact same location as the Fisher Wallace stimulator. So we're not changing the location of the electrodes from our first device, and we're not changing the electrical output. So, really the innovation here is the industrial design in order to have the device fit very comfortably onto a VR unit, so you don't even really feel it's there. And also this idea of being able to curate content in VR that's synced with the neurostimulation and what you're trying to achieve with it. So there's kind of two areas of content. We want to talk about the visual side. There's the kind of more consumer wellness type content, and then the actual kind of what I would call prescription level or real medical type VR content. So what we're doing with Kortex to begin with is we're starting with really consumer wellness content, and we paired the stimulation with a game called Land's End, which has won a lot of awards. It was designed by a VR studio called Us2 Games. They do a lot of work with Apple and Google, and they're very, very well regarded. And this game is it's an alien landscape, but it's kind of very reminiscent of some beautiful areas of like the Southwest, like in Arizona, kind of has a deserty feel with lots of orange tones. It's pretty absent of blue light, which is the kind of light that would keep you up at night. So it has that kind of night shift orange. So it's something that won't really disturb your circadian rhythms if you're using it in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interactive game. It's not violent. It's very meditative, and you kind of have to explore this beautiful environment, and you're looking for kind of pieces to this alien puzzle. And as you kind of connect these pieces throughout your journey, you get a sense of a bigger story. And it's a very peaceful game. And the first time I used it was without neurostimulation, but within minutes of playing this game, I felt just like I had taken some deep breaths, and I just felt this very kind of limbic system type response to the game. Mm-hmm. And that combined with it just struck me, the head strap of the VR unit itself is the exact same placement as the headband that we have with our first generation neurostimulator, the Fisher Wallace stimulator. And so then I just slipped the electrodes from the Fisher Wallace stimulator under the VR headset as I was playing this game, and I had just this incredible experience of just really feeling relaxed, both by the content and by the neurostimulation. And I realized that not only could we have kind of a therapeutic effect, but this kind of experience would really help increase patient compliance or user compliance. So, which is always a big issue with therapy. So that the content can have a therapeutic effect, but it's also something that you want to experience, and that helps you kind of to be consistent with your practice. So that's kind of how the thing evolved. So I started sketching I actually have background as a visual artist as well. So I started sketching some designs, and then I sent those designs to a very well-known industrial designer, someone who actually designed the Nook for Barnes and Noble, the reader, and a couple of other kind of big well-known pieces of hardware. So he was very interested in it. He had actually used the Fisher Wallace stimulator to treat his own sleep issues, so he was a big fan of the technology.
He was on board.
It was on board. So he was very kind to fit us in on short notice, and so then he generated some beautiful design for it. We then went to Indiegogo, which is a crowdfunding website, and I thought that would be kind of a good market test, that if we could introduce it in a crowdfunding website, like a Kickstarter, it's basically Kickstarter and Indiegogo are the two big ones, that would validate whether the market had any demand for it, because we weren't going to advertise it. We were just going to, kind of use some blogs and some other kind of organic attention, and we sent it out to our past customers. And within about 2 weeks, we raised about $100,000 for product development, and that was really a very strong validation that there is some demand for this. And so then we put it in production. So we have a team of engineers who all went to MIT, called Gen 1. They're out of Boston now, and they're working on finishing the actual engineering, and then we're going into, they're going to tool the tooling stage and the assembly stage, and then we're going to ship it either at the very end of July or sometime in August.
Well, that's exciting. Good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So you actually fortuitously, because you'd had the experience with Fisher Wallace,
right,
and you could see the benefit of Fisher Wallace.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then you put that together with a VR.
Right.
And you all of a sudden you had even yet a more intensified, more complete experience, which was also, this is perhaps not the right word, but had a certain seductive quality as well, because you were in fact doing something.
Right. Yes. And that, that default mode network action, when you're actually able to kind of focus on something external, and at the same time you're getting the neurostimulation. But there's quite a bit more that you can take the VR. For instance, there was a study published last year. Some British researchers created avatars of patients who had major depressive disorder, and then they also created avatars of children, and they did this study where they had the patients in the virtual reality first talking to the virtual children and giving them kind of compassionate uh, uh, dialogue, and basically it's called self-compassion therapy. But they start with you're kind of projecting the compassion onto the child, and then they through the virtual reality then put the patient into the body of the child, and then the child's now looking at the patient is now looking at themselves, an avatar of themselves, giving the compassion to the patient who's in the body of the child. Now, obviously, that's something you can only do in virtual reality, and
it's amazing.
And they actually used kind of industry standard depression testing to show significant symptom reduction of major depressive disorder. They had, I think, 15 patients. It was a small pilot, but it was more of a proof of concept. And so they were able to reduce depression symptoms with this type of VR therapy as a standalone. And so, that's just one area where if you're actually combining neurostimulation with that, so you're combining something that has, scientifically validated to treat depression. You're also, the brain stimulation, electrical stimulation is increasing focus and concentration. We have studies on that as well. So, we can actually potentially accelerate and amplify the effects of the VR therapy with the neurostimulation. And so, then that's just one example, and that's just one diagnosis. And so I think when you start thinking about how much you can influence the brain through neurostimulation and through visual stimulus, and if you can do that on a consistent basis, day after day, week after week, month after month, the results, I think, are going to be tremendous. And when you talk about whether you have veterans, war veterans, who can experience some exposure therapy through VR, so they can learn to kind of dampen their emotional responses to memories by re-experiencing them in VR in combination with neurostimulation. When you can start doing those kinds of things at home, you don't have to then transport these soldiers from their communities to these disparate psychiatric centers. You can do quite a bit just in the home with the VR headset and neurostimulation. You can bring the doctor right to them through the VR, through an avatar, through. So I think this idea of not just having a great therapeutic benefit, but being able to do so much more in the home with this type of system, and it's also going to obviously cut costs. When it comes down to it.
Kelly, you've got me very stimulated with a bunch of different questions. We're going to take we're going to take a break here for our sponsors. We're going to take for you and me, it's going to be 10 seconds, and then they're going to pop right into to the sponsorship
thing.
But the questions I'm going to ask you when we get back is really, in a way, I want you to please tell us, in a way, that example you gave is like a trial identification with the person who's the recipient. There's a whole empathetic response training thing that's going on. So we'll talk more about that when we get back. So let's take a break right now. Be back soon.
Sure.
Well, folks, you know as well as I do that psychiatric treatment failure, especially after multiple medication trials and those very, very brief hospitalizations, may prove insufficient to deal at home with the complexity of troubled children and those adolescents from 6 to 17 years old. Improved care, those next mandatory steps, should include a more comprehensive approach to address those multiple levels of challenges, from family to peers to school, diagnostically from defiance to depression, on every level for families, including military families internationally. The Barry Robinson Center's 32-acre open college-like campus in Norfolk, Virginia, provides safety and security and clean, comfortable living. How do we know? We refer folks over there all the time, strongly endorse what they're doing. So for further information, an informed interview, connect at this page, barryrobinson.org/core. Well, you folks already know that here at Core Brain Journal, we're on a mission to introduce you to resources that make significant contributions to the investigation of those predictable mind science applications. Our colleagues at DHA Lab Group provide a real difference with treatment options for people at every level, from first awareness of mind problems to those frustrating times when even well-informed treatment becomes surprisingly unpredictable. For my entire professional life, from psychoanalysis to brain scans, I've searched for, yes, improved predictability. The good news for all of us, from professionals to patients, remarkably effective research offers useful, cost-effective, organic options far beyond guesswork with psychiatric medications alone. DHA lab tests measure unbalanced biomedical details through easily available testing, now available globally for a variety of molecular answers from, for example, methylation, copper, and cryptopyrrole challenges. Check in for more details at dhalab.com core. That's dhalab.com/core. Well, Kelly, back to you. That is so interesting because, I mean, the technology is so helpful because there's only so much your imagination can do, but with that virtual reality, you actually put another person over another person. You know, you don't know this perhaps, or you might know it, but we train psychiatrists to not get caught in an identification with the patient. So what's different between sympathy, where you go over and you do a trial identification and you're with the person in their mind, but you get stuck over there, you can't come back, then you're lost, because then you got to go do something to fix them and you just lose your objectivity. Whereas an empathetic response is you go over, you have a trial identification, you're in that other human being, in their life in some way, obviously not in reality. It has a certain virtual reality aspect, but you come back and you bring yourself in it to objectify and help them understand what's going on. I was thinking so much about the difference between sympathy and empathy when you were talking about that. So tell us now, back to it. Another application that occurred to me, did you do anything with children in this regard, or adolescents? Because you were using a child example, but that was an adult. Have you done anything with children or not?
So we've done a safety study with the Fisher Wallace stimulator, and this was done by Gadalon, University of Maryland, with children with cerebral palsy, and it was a safety study. Mm-hmm. So and the subjects were as young as 2. We do not have pediatric marketing clearance from FDA, so we're an adult indication. So we don't go out and market to
Understood.
anyone under that. But that said, doctors, as they can with any drug, have the discretion to prescribe a product to whoever they deem fit, and so so that can happen. But we don't go out and market to it.
I understand.
I think now with Kortex, just to be clear, and this is an important point. Fisher Wallace stimulator, my partner Chip was on talking about that. That is a prescription device. That's an FDA-regulated device, and it has FDA-regulated indications to treat depression, anxiety, insomnia. A Kortex, this first version of it that we're releasing, we're using different indication language. So we're saying it's for stress and sleep management, even though it's the same exact technology as Fisher Wallace stimulator. Now, what that allows us to do from a marketing perspective is you don't need a prescription, and it's not regulated by FDA, the Kortex. Mm-hmm. Fisher Wallace stimulator is, Kortex is not. And so, basically, if you're, we're going to continue to market the Fisher Wallace stimulator as a medical device. And with Kortex, we're not going after that bipolar depression crowd. That's what we're doing with the Fisher Wallace stimulator. Yeah. With Kortex, even though it's the same technology, we're really looking at people who, are just experiencing stress, who want to help, manage their sleep. And that's what Kortex is going to be marketed for. So now we are planning to come out with a prescription version of Kortex, which is basically going to be the Fisher Wallace stimulator, but something that's just attaches to a VR headset. So it can get a little confusing when I'm talking about these different things from an indication point of view, but we're going to have separate websites it's going to be clear, what's what online.
Well,
So
thanks
we're
for
not mixing.
clarifying that, because that was, that did enter my mind, because as you were giving examples, I was wondering about that. And because on the one hand, it seems like the VR situation is so completely safe. It's undeniably, there's, the person, if they're uncomfortable, they're going to take it off. I mean,
Right.
and there's no implication of this is what you have to do. This is something you can do if you'd like to. It doesn't have quite the intense therapeutic imperative that one might have with the Fisher Wallace stimulator.
Right. That's right. And but also keep in mind that the United States is the only country that actually requires a prescription for the Fisher Wallace stimulator. So we're over the counter in Canada. We're over the counter in Europe. We're approved in both Europe and in Canada. We were recently approved in Mexico over the counter. So there's a big international market for Fisher Wallace stimulator, and obviously there will be for Kortex and VR. The other thing that's interesting is that, with VR, is that the gaming aspect of VR is really geared towards a largely young male audience. Now, when you look at the market for antidepressant medication, if you talk to anyone who works at a big pharma, they will tell you that about 2/3 of their customers are women, and that that doesn't necessarily mean that women are that much more depressed per capita, but so that what also excites me about Kortex is and also when we eventually do a prescription version of Kortex is that you already have a young male audience that's engaged in VR, and this could be a way to get treatment to them in a way that's not as stigmatizing as medication, or and actually is integrated with the very thing that they enjoy, which is that gaming element. So that's why we're excited to have partnered with Us2 Games and Land's End for the Kortex launch. I'm also talking to some researchers on the PTSD side and also the substance abuse side, which is a little bit more medical focused, and we want to get some research going there because, for instance, with substance abuse, VR is a great tool for trying to expose people to the cues that they have to abuse and to use substances, and you can kind of help condition them to basically say no, to feel more comfortable in situations where there's drugs available, where they and to have some control. That has been shown to be very helpful. So and we did a big pilot study, as Chip probably mentioned, at Phoenix House a few years ago, in which we increased the retention rate of rehab patients by 50% at the 90-day mark. So we have a track record in substance abuse with the Fisher Wallace stimulator. There's already proven published studies on VR content helping with substance abuse rehab. So, we really do believe in the whole is going to be greater than the parts, and so combining these kinds of technologies is very exciting, both on the wellness side and on the medical side.
Well, it really is. I mean, I think the thing that I've seen with men, and you're so right in your figures, because I think and I've wondered about this myself, and I mean, this is completely anecdotal. This is Parker's view of what the deal is with guys. But, guys don't want to submit. I mean, they're, the whole thing since we were chasing mastodons around the Transvaal,
right?
A guy who's a submitter you're going to have to kill him because he's going to be a drag on the organization,
That's the psychology, unfortunately. And I think, you certainly see that, as an issue that has been publicly addressed in veteran population, where, a lot of, and you saw, I think, World War II, I mean, that's, massive amounts caused massive amounts of PTSD, just wasn't very publicly acknowledged or personally acknowledged. And I think at least, we've come a long way since then, but it's still a big issue. And so, I think this is an interesting. The VR is an interesting way to address that, because it's, and Kortex, if you look at it, it looks like something a Navy SEAL would wear. I mean, it's actually a pretty macho looking piece of technology. So I think that also will help its adoption. I hope.
Well, and you have the gaming, and you have the mastery thing. You have an opportunity to do something, to make something of yourself in a real way, instead of submitting to some kind of psychiatrist who's going to give you a label and throw some meds at you. You have a way out of the conundrum that you feel in your head, and it's worth a shot. You feel much easier about giving it a shot.
Yep.
So this is really very interesting, and I'm really glad that you've mentioned that, because I'm going to include these show notes in. We have a whole page for vets it's on traumatic brain and combat stress. And I mentioned this to Chip. I was saying he really needs to be talking to the Dr. Bart Billings, who is very involved with combat stress. One of the world thought leaders. We interviewed him many episodes ago. But we'll include you guys on that. So you're going to be coming out in July or August.
Yeah, hopefully into July, but no later than the end of August.
And just to reaffirm, there's no prescription needed. It's just
not for Kortex.
You'll have a website, and we'll have and if you your website, I'm sure will be we'll just put it up on the show notes. And
if you want to check it out now, you can go to Indiegogo, or you can just type in Kortex on Google, and it'll come up. It's home right now is on the Indiegogo page where
I got you.
Fundraise it. Yep.
Well, I mean, we won't be talking again between now and when it's launched. Don't hesitate to send me the link, and I'll just update the page. It's not a problem.
Thank you.
I do it myself. I'd be happy to do it for you.
Thank you.
Now, this is extremely, extremely interesting because it offers such a wide variety of options for otherwise people. In a way, you can do this without having to say that you have a problem. Part of the whole thing is acquiescence of,
that's a good point.
Yeah. I've got this problem. And this is one step closer to, let me just try it. There's no consequences, and you have less of a exposure to something can go wrong. And so then you have this sense of self-mastery a little bit more with it in a certain way. So one more quick thing before we go, so we can help the audience and me as well. So I'm very familiar with neurofeedback, and I'm also familiar with alpha stim. And tell us a little bit about, let's break those different products down a little bit from your perspective of how the Kortex would differ from, and how Fisher Wallace differs from alpha stim, and break that down a little bit.
Sure. Well, I think neurofeedback actually very fertile ground for VR combination with Kortex. So I actually see there being quite a bit of neurofeedback content that can be combined now with neurostim through VR. And again, it kind of comes back to that default mode network and some other, it being able to use kind of visual cues to train the brain. And that's where VR, they're already using it. They're using VR to do that. So I think this combination is going to be great for the two things. So alpha stim, great product, a little bit different in terms of the technology and also the electrode placement. So their electrodes go in the earlobes. But I think we got our FDA clearance in 1990, and I believe AlphaStim got theirs in 1991. So we've, both of these products have been on the market for a long time. They're both been proven safe and effective. We have a bit more of electrical output with our device. So ours goes up to 4 milliamps. I believe AlphaStim's is around 1 as their maximum. So we have a bit more electrical output. Our frequencies are a bit different. And again, that electrode placement. So, their electrons aren't quite as well suited for a combination VR headset unit as ours. Lucky for us, our electrodes already go right underneath the head strap.
It fits together already, yeah.
So that's an advantage that we have that we're certainly leveraging. But they're a competitor. We compete, but I have respect for them.
Well, folks who are out there in audience land, we have a PDF that's going to be on the show notes. You're listening to this, you may be in your car, but we have a PDF that's going to be downloadable that they've furnished. It's a pilot study of safety and efficacy on the cranial stimulation. So we're going to have that PDF download so you can pop over there and download that when it comes up. So usually what we do is we're winding down is we ask about where the website is. You told us about that already. And you folks out there, listeners, we're going to have that website put up later on. But for right now, if the best place to go, I would assume would be, you mentioned the Indigo, say that again, Indiegogo?
The Indiegogo website. Really, if you just search for Kortex with a K in Google, you'll find it. But if you want to check out our neurostimulation, and if you want to get something today, fisherwallace.com, that, of course, is the home of our prescription product.
Yeah, so I'll put that up there. And I really appreciate it. This is very, very exciting. You know, when you think about different things that people can do, I mean, this is light years. When I was a kid, the state of the art was psychoanalysis, you know, and I tell you, I spent thousands of dollars and many, many hours of my young life running around for supervision and figuring out psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
I'm not running psychoanalysis down. I think it's a very interesting tool.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's very, very interesting. And there, you know, people get well with it, but the cost effectiveness of something.
That's what I was going to say. Interacting with a person, it's hard to beat, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's very expensive, and it's also, you have to get to that person. But you know, VR is going to allow that kind of interaction, I think, to happen more easily, actually. So I think that VR could be bringing in maybe a new life for a lot of these interpersonal type therapies.
Well, it sure sounds like it. Kelly Roman, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And what we're going to do is we're going to have you back when you're up and running.
Thank you, sir.
And it's been a lot of fun. And I think this is something that our audience is going to be interested in. And so when you're up and running, you get some more legs on the machine, then we'll have another conversation and see how some of these applications do turn out, because you'll have even more experience with outcome studies.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cal. You have a great day. Nice talking to you, man.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.